should be a fun one. Welcome to the Circular Economy in Practice. I know that they were quickly introduced, but let me just introduce really fast again. We have Marco from AUDI. We have Holger from the Boston Consulting Group. We have Michelle from Lithium, and we have Marco from, we have Jonas from Nornorm. So before we get started, I just want to ask a question to the audience. Raise your hand if you are representing a company or business today. Raise your hand. Raise it high. And keep your hand raised if you think your company or business have achieved a circular economy.
Wow.
Oh. Okay. We still have some left. Okay. Maybe like 4, 3. Oh. Okay. Hands down. Thank you so much. So as we can see, circular economy in practice is in practice. Keyword practice. So let's start off with this very basic question. What does a circular economy mean? Jonas, let's start with you.
Okay. Well, I think I think circular economy is basically building a business where you basically see zero waste and actually designing it from bottom up to actually be circular, and not only talking about the end waste. But for me, the goal has always been to actually start your business with a circular business model. And that's what we've done in Nornorm. And I think we had the great pleasure of getting a 110 million euro seed and actually creating and designing the business model from the beginning to be fully circular. So it has no impact on planet, but also creates a great product for people, but also getting the capital, because in the end you need to have a great business model as well, and providing a product that people love. So I think that for me is the most important perspective with the circular business. Start from the beginning and designing it for circularity.
Amazing. Michelle?
I guess I'm going to agree with everything that my learned colleague here said, but I'm also going to add that those of us that come from a little bit more of a old school model, we have to learn a lot from the things that the people like Jonas are doing. But what we have to do is take decisions. So for instance, at RockTech, when we engineered the converter project that we're working on in Guben, we built into the engineering what happens if. It's not possible to do it all today, and I think one of the things we'll talk about is that this is a super complicated issue. It's a super complicated issue. But for those of us in more old school businesses, we have to think now, what can we be doing in the future that will get us to a circular economy?
Holger?
Well, without repeating the points, I think circularity is a necessity for us as a society and for our planet. And comes with a lot of challenges in driving innovation around business models, what Jonas said, but it's also about innovation in designing products, using products, also innovation on technology and how to treat products at the end of life, because at some point each product will reach a certain end of life. It's about managing complex ecosystems, and that's what companies, we have many companies here, is something new for companies, that you can't do it alone typically. You need to orchestrate many other partners in order to make it happen, and that's one of the challenges. And of course, it's also for us as consumers that we have to change our thinking, how we use products, to perceive products also as a source of value, not just as something that I throw away. So I think it's a super important topic, but comes with a lot of transformational changes.
Thank you. And Marco?
Actually, I have 2 answers to that question. One is more like the technical one. Of course, circularity means that you have a product end of life, and then you try to really maximize the recycling quota and putting all the raw materials back into a new product, ideally without downcycling or something. So this is more or less the technical question. But the second answer I would give, it's the future way of how we will do business. So I truly believe that if you don't get the circular economy question right, you will have a big challenge in the future to survive, especially in traditional industries like the automotive industry Audi operates in, because a car is kind of a rolling bank of resources, and you have to use that resource and maximize the circularity to really solve a lot of problems. We are here to solve, like green tech, as the name is heading to. We will solve ecological questions, but I think circularity can do so much more. So you can solve also social questions, because you don't have a lot of sustainability and human rights problems if you put something into a circle. And also you will, for example, solve questions like dependencies. Because if you have your own resource bank, you don't have to rely on resources maybe coming from certain regions. So I think circularity is one of the keys for a lot of industries to succeed as a business as a whole in the future.
Yes, thank you. And we're all talking about circularity from a business lens. And this notion, this ideology, it's not that radical. Actually, circularity has always existed in nature. If you think about how food goes into nutrients and it becomes soil, life has always been circular. The human systems, businesses, we created this linear model, right? So what are some of the biggest barriers in accomplishing a circular economy, specifically in your industry? So Jonas, we'll start with you again.
Well, I think the biggest challenge, is that we have adapted to a linear model and we are basically on drugs because we like the perspective. We sell something, we need to develop something new, and we sell the same TV again. And the business models are all generating cash today. The circular model is more about design and actually having a lifetime perspective. How can you actually deploy a product over a much longer time? Because if you don't own, you can circulate to others, and which makes it affordable for more. So I actually believe that a circular model is actually much more efficient, both for the planet, but also for the company as a whole. But where I think a lot of management has gone wrong is that we're so dependent on selling new things tomorrow. So we will iterate the car and develop a new car, and then we'll sell that model, and it's called something else. And then we create that demand because we get the profits in today. But if you really want to do something circular, you really need to think, okay, how does this divide over years and years? So we need to invest today, but the profits will be reaped over maybe 15, 20 years, which becomes a very difficult business model because we need to finance all the cars, all the furniture, and to actually do that transition. So I think it comes to design, and I think this is where the biggest challenge, how do you as a company like Audi and actually transform from a linear model where everything is about choice to a circular model where you actually can have a much higher utilization and switching the products from one user to another, and in that sense lowering the production cost. And that is on the top of the business model. And then you have the end of the business model. It's like, what do you do with all the used cars? If you would own them, maybe you could deploy them and rent them out to others. But today we're often just left with those TVs. They dump them. The cars are sold on a listing site somewhere. We don't care about it as a company because we sold it and moved on.
Yes.
And now we're starting to say, okay, maybe I need to take some responsibility. I think you need to build that responsibility in from the get-go of your business model and what you want to achieve as a company.
Okay, so overconsumption is one of them, and I think it's really important because everyone here is representing a business or company. They have to go back to their stakeholders and say, our profits will come, but spread out. That's what you're saying. Okay, Michelle, what about you? Biggest barrier in achieving a circular economy?
I think there's going to be a lot of technical challenges. So I think that in certainly what we do with the mining side of the business and then the converter side of the business, there's technical questions and technical issues everywhere that need to be solved. And I think that one of the themes I heard with some of the other speakers here is that we're going to have to learn as human beings how to work together to find these solutions. And I think that technical challenges are going to be an issue, but I think it's something that we can work on together. It's going to require a different way of thinking about those problems. But old school industries, technical challenges are going to be one of the big issues, and it's going to require some big brains to figure those things out and the ability to work together to do it.
Holger, you consult for some of the biggest brands in the world on this specific topic. What is the biggest barrier you've seen with your clients?
Look, I see that one of the biggest barriers is that in the past, raw materials, or to be a bit more precise, virgin raw materials are just too cheap, right? Because they are perceived as cheap, endless, right? But as we grow as a society, as we grow as an economy, we start to realize that things are getting finite, right? And that we produce a lot of waste, which can mean waste in a more narrow sense, but also can mean waste in something that we have things just lying around, not using anymore. It's piling up, right? And we don't see it as a source of value. And once we realize, as consumers, but also as companies, that raw materials is something that has to be treated as a scarce resource beyond the pure price, but also in terms of keeping our planet alive for next generations. If we come to that conclusion, this will trigger companies to think about creating new business models, new designs of products, and changing things. And I think the second topic that is a barrier is that there is no pull coming from the consumers, because we're also used to it. Like you said, we are under trucks. We buy something, use it, we throw it away, and we don't care about it, right? And as long as we behave like that, there's no need for companies to change their behavior. So it's also coming from our side that we have to rethink the way how we use products.
So viewing waste as an asset and having responsibility both from a company's side and individual and consumer level. Marco, what about the automotive industry? Biggest barrier.
So actually, I would build on what Holger said, but I would put it in the phrase, I think the biggest challenge is in our heads. And this goes into many directions. One is you have to convince, for example, in our industry, you have to convince the ones who decide that the linear model will come to an end sooner or later. And then you have to have a circular economy in place. And then we come to a really big challenge. How will the transformation work? Because in our case, it is not like we're a startup and we can build up from scratch. So we will have a big transformation where we have the linear model parallel to the circular model. And then the question is, when will be the tipping point? We have a little bit, like with transformation in the automotive industry, we're just experiencing it from the technological side. So we're going from combustion engine to electrification. And I think this will be just the next revolution or evolution, however you might put it. There you have to now convince the ones who decide that they have to invest into that second, and I would call it future business model, which is circularity. And of course, this also goes into the consumers and our business model as a whole. So maybe you have to have offerings not only selling cars, but also ideas how to get them back, because otherwise you cannot really put it into a circle. Technologically, I think we're on a good way. So also on the GreenTech, so if you want to have a look at the booth, we did a lot of research, what is possible on all the kind of hotspot materials like steel, aluminum, plastics, all the battery raw materials and glass to see what is possible. And like from a technological point of view, it's about currently like up to 60% what we can get from an used end-of-life car into a new car. And this is not the 95% you have to recycle from a law point of view, because this is not going into a car, it's going somewhere else. But I think technologically we are we already did some steps, but now it's about putting the business model ready. That's I think, the biggest challenge.
Holger, did you have something to, yes?
Yeah, I want to build on one thing, which I think is important, is that we need to convince the mindset of people. The question is, how can we do that, right? You said, we have to make sure that people have to do something else, right? So the question is, do we force people to do something? No. Of course we could. But the other thing is more articulating that there's an advantage. Can be a financial advantage, can be other forms of benefit, that pursuing a circular business model has an advantage for them. I think that's a better way of doing it. And regulation, of course, always has a bit of a touch, being forced to do something. And at some point it might be good to trigger a first step. But I think, from my experience as a consultant, things are successful once you have a good business model and an advantage in a business model behind. Then you can start convincing people, right? And convincing companies.
Yeah.
Jonas?
Yeah. I think I just want to build on that. And I think, our mission as Nornorm is not just, renting out furniture and having a subscription model. It's more about saying, can we show the world that you actually can succeed in making a lot of money on a circular business model, because if you can show the money, the boring people will follow. And I think we're in a very good way in that perspective. And I think, we can show that the market is there. I think we've deployed furniture from, border to border in Germany in size, 300,000 square meters, where millions of square meters coming in. So there is demand. The other perspective, I think, is like, we need to do it at scale. And I think there's a lot of great circular business models out there, but they don't have the possibility at doing it at scale. And we're trying to do it at industrial scale, and that proving that there is unit economics. And we're already 2 years into the perspective, profitable on all markets, because the existing industry is so broken. Which, of course, when we can show that, we can then attract even more capital, and then that, I think, will that maybe we will surface and say, okay, this is a good example, and then maybe the leadership and the board of AUDI will say, oh, maybe they're into that, because everything else was just useless. We have to sell a lot of cars to be profitable, otherwise it will never work.
Yes.
So,
Michelle. Yes, go ahead.
I think that there are going to be, like when you're talking about B2C type things, that you can change the way people think. When you're talking about some of the more B2B, big, sticky issues, I do think there's a place for government regulation and intervention to give it kind of a push in the right direction.
Yes, that was my next question, because your background is in law. So I want to understand how important is policy and law when it comes to implementing a circular economy in these sectors.
I think I don't think we can do it without it, because I think that there are going to be, like, let's take a legacy business like mining. Without strong regulation, to Jonas's point, it won't work financially on its own. It needs a little bit of a kick in the right direction to get that moving. And then I think, because it's a little bit, in some of those industries, it's a bit too indirect. So, people can be annoyed by, let's say, mining practices. And as a Canadian, like, we're all about the mining. And people may be a little bit annoyed, but it's too indirect in terms of getting the business to change. So I do think that there's a role for government intervention in some of those areas. And I think, too, that, for instance, what we're working on in Guben, there's really a role at this moment in time in some of these sectors for government subsidies. There has to be. I mean, and I don't know, you guys saw that VW went to Ontario because there was a $13 billion check involved. So, that's going to be, it's going to be a bit of a funny road between here and where we need to get to. And I think that there's going to be a role for subsidy, government intervention. And I think that for sure, the EU needs to make sure that they want to be leaders in this space. There's nothing we can do to move lithium from Canada to Germany, I mean, in terms of in the ground. But there are things we can do to make sure that the pieces of the supply chain are done in places that are close to OEMs and all that sort of thing. And that's going to require some intervention.
Yes. The circular economy right now is very much a zigzag economy. Okay, we're going to go to Marco and then Holger. Marco?
I wanted to add something on the regulatory aspect. Of course, it's necessary, but I think the regulation will be safeguarding the minimum. So it's not for the ones, hopefully, who are in the room who want to be, leading. And coming back to convincing the boards or your company leaders, I think there's no better time to do that today, because we come from a world where sustainability was about saving the world, and maybe it was a conscious thing, and you were talking about, we should do it, it would be nice. But now we come to that point where if you don't get it right, you will lose money, you will lose your license to operate by regulatory issues. And then I think, and this is the really interesting, the third level, if you do it right, you can get a competitive edge. Mm-hmm. So if you do it right now, you will be at the forerunners, and then you will get a competitive edge. And this is not only, a qualitative one. It can be a hard financial one. Just take the whole ESG ratings, which also look at circularity. Then you get a better funding, different interest rates. So it's not like this, very fuzzy, conscious thing. It's a hard business reality. If you do it right now, you will succeed. And this is what you have to do now, because in 5 years' time, the one who decided today will be maybe out of reach.
Yes, it impacts your bottom line. So it's about saving your business now.
Right.
from saving the world to saving your business, which inevitably saves the world if you save your business as well. Holger, I know you had something.
Yeah, I think on regulation comes a lot with the kind of mindset we are putting, thresholds, targets, caps, limits on it. That's for me a part of the negative incentive part of regulation. But I think also regulation can have more of this positive aspect, right? Providing an environment that inspires entrepreneurs like Jonas to invest into something, providing more positive spin. And we have seen examples in the past, take the solar industry, which was coming more from the incentive-driven model to drive business instead of just putting limits and targets. So I think it's a balance of both things. Some businesses probably need more limits and barriers. Other businesses, in order to create innovation, need a bit more incentives to drive something. So it's a balance of both dimensions, I think.
Yeah, and I think maybe I could also add to that. I think as an entrepreneur, being on the forefront of running a circular business at scale, I think the challenge we have is actually changing the perspective of ownership. And with that comes the financings. So regulatory is one thing, if we could, make a rule that says that every German company needs to have circular office furniture, I would be super happy, But maybe that's one way of taking it. I don't think we need that. But I think the other perspective is basically the capital needed to really secure that you can take back and own that and build that product needs enormous amount of cash. And I think that is what the circular economy is striving for. And I would urge, what happens if Audi would own all the vehicles? Because then you could secure that all the assets come back, but then you need to finance that. That's a huge. Northvolt, I had the same discussion. If you believe so much that all the batteries are going to come back and they're so valuable, why don't you rent them out? Yeah, because the capital needed for that is gigantic. So here I think we have a huge issue for the EU as a whole to secure how can we fund all the great circular business models out there, because I've had the luxury of having enormous amount of capital getting started, but that enables the growth. But I see a lot of my friends having enormous problems actually scaling their business because the access to capital has become difficult. And today, with the interest rates, it's even more difficult to drive a successful. So I would actually urge that's where we really need to regulate on one end, taking away the bad things, but then as a society say, okay, if we really believe in it, how can we fuel the economy to support these models? Yeah. So Audi would say, wow, this is great, because we're now getting enormous amount of loans from the government to support this, so we can say zero waste, because we will be responsible for nothing is wasted out of that car, because we own it and we will build it for that success. But I'm hacking on Audi here, which I am a very happy owner as well. But but it's.
But Jonas, what do you think comes first? Because it's like the chicken or the egg. Because you need capital in order to do these circular initiatives, but you also need the circular initiatives to come first before the capital. So how do you balance?
I think first of all you need to secure, is there demand? We only offer as good as new. So I think that's the perspective. Is there a demand for it? If there is a demand, people will, their capital will follow. Then I think you need to look at it as a unit economics perspective. I'm not an environmentalist in that sense. I'm an industrialist in that sense. I said, okay, how can I contribute of starting with zero and contributing to the planet? But I think I have also worked in the capital business and raised a lot of money, so I understand how they talk. But I also need to provide returns to the capital. I need to build a product that people love, where they can change and thrive. But I also want to have something that is planet zero, start with zero waste, zero perspective, because that's my way of giving back. But if you don't have all those three combinations, I don't think you will excel, because you can't force down a used chair on someone if they don't believe it. Buy a new one if you want it, but it's your choice. But we need to change that. I think I see the society changing enormously fast. I often joke when they don't want to have our products, like, check with your younger employees. Do you want to buy expensive Vitra chairs in the conference room, or do you want to have something circular? And because I think it's, it's
a social movement as well. So Michelle, I wanted to ask you, how do we balance our quest for circularity without depleting more natural resources or causing more human injustices?
Well, so in terms of, there's just not enough in the system right now. So we can talk about
not enough
lithium, not enough. There's still going to be mining required, because in the circular economy such as it is right now, let's take battery recycling. There's just not enough there. There needs to be more introduced, and because there's more EVs, all that kind of stuff. For instance, the battery directive, the EU, 4% recycled lithium by 2030. That feels like a drop in the bucket, but the reason why, and we were talking about this before, the reason why that number is so low is there's just not that many batteries around. So unfortunately, or fortunately if it's done correctly, there's going to be a fair amount of mining between here and getting that, because you just need to get more resources into that system, and you can't do it with what's in there now. So I think that the best way to approach that is to make sure that it's regulated to the best of all the responsible government's ability. That's the other thing, I suppose, is I think that we as a society can be supportive of the jurisdictions in which, like, there's some tough practices in mining going on in some countries in Africa and things like that. That's a super complicated question in terms of what's going on there, DRC and cobalt. Something like 80% of the world's cobalt comes from the DRC. Yes. Again, we can't change that. That's where it is. We can change the way we deal with that. So we have to accept that there's going to be more mining. We have to accept that there's better ways to do it than the way we've done it historically.
Okay, let's start with regulation. Holger, what are some of the most successful case studies that you've seen where clients have been able to achieve or are very much en route to circularity?
Look, it's often small steps, right? And if you look at today's companies, they all come from a linear model, right? And if you build something new, of course, it's much easier. So it's about how companies can adjust or enhance existing business models in a way to become more circular. There's a couple of examples. I mean, you can take, start from clothing, right? I've seen that companies start to, build basically circular materials, that you can use afterwards quite successfully. If you take cars, take the wheels, right? I mean, you can the tires is also a good way to recycle them. So there's a couple of very good lighthouse projects ongoing that start to work and also make commercial sense, right? I mean, that's the point. What is successful today has to have a certain commercial advantage. Otherwise, companies don't do it.
Thank you. Marco, so let's say Audi achieves full circularity, but that's just one company. So how do we make circularity the norm within the industry, within the automotive, and also intersectorally?
So I think, as I told you before, I think there will not be another way because there's so many pros. So one thing, of course, is the sustainability aspect. But as I said, it's like for me, it's an economical reality that it will help. So everybody who wants to, if you talk about the automotive industry, who wants to succeed, will have to have circularity in place in 10 or 20 years, because otherwise you will not have the resources available. You will not have probably not the prices you want for that resources. I'm coming back to that picture of a rolling resource bank or raw material bank our cars are. Of course, you have to solve the issue, how do you get them back? But it's just economically feasible. And
but that's isolated circularity within your own company. Yeah. What does it look like if Audi teamed up with a BMW, and what would that circularity look like within the industry at large and cross-sectorally?
So I don't know if this will happen. So because it will not happen that. So we will try to close our own loops. So take our cars and maximize what we put back from a end-of-life car into a new car. Of course, what could happen is that we then add other recycled material, for example, plastics, and put that on top. Yeah, so we will have kind of our own loops, and maybe on top of that we have another, share of recycled material, like maybe, as I said, plastics. We will maybe have an aluminum, which maybe comes from a different source, because that's very good. Aluminum you could really kind of use, very often and without really deteriorating the quality, and also steel. But I don't know if we would give our cars to our competitors as a source. I think this.
I'll be happy to respond.
Yes, Holger, and then we'll go to Jonas.
Yeah. Yes, I think I disagree on that point, because I think also as companies you have to run through a certain change of mindset, right? Yeah. Because in the end, a material is a material, and it doesn't matter where it comes from, right? And you have to think about connecting loops, not just being in your own circle, because in the end, it doesn't matter where the battery comes from an Audi or whatever, or BMW, as long as you have access to the raw material, you can still bring it back in your own loop. So think a bit more open, and it's of course an ideal situation to close your own loops.
It's like, I think it's very, I don't want to put it selfish, but I'd like to use my vehicles and of course everything else I get. But of course, if it would help overall, and we wouldn't be able to maybe use all the material out of our end-of-life vehicles, and we cannot use it, and then of course it makes sense to give it somewhere else. So you're right on that point. Yeah.
But I'll be happy to help. I challenged the IKEA board, based on working with BCG, and say, okay, how do you create adjacent growth? And they say, okay, if you like this circularity model so much, Jonas, are you willing to put your money where your mouth is? And I said, yes, I'll take all my save and invest. I'm happy to meet, the Audi board and say, and say, how do we create a circular vehicle? And I'm willing to put my money where my mouth is there, and we can create a Nornorm vehicle, and we can start with circular principles, and we'll go out to the market and really challenge it.
Yeah, but as I said, I think we're pretty far, so we know how to do it. But the question is, it's not only the product. The product is the first question, and I'm totally on your side. You have to design for circularity as well. But I think we talked a lot about the business model as a whole, and I think that's the bigger question, because then it's not only your product and your kind of company you have to maybe change, but you have to change the whole value stream, and this is the challenge. And there, of course, there might things happen that we even exchange, our raw material streams. But I have to be a little bit selfish. I would love to see 100% of our end-of-life vehicles in our new vehicles. So that's kind of one of my visions.
Okay, Michelle, and then we're out of time.
Okay, I think there's a huge amount of opportunity here, because if it all ends up being recycled, who cares where it goes next? And I think there's going to be tons of technological innovation, lots of startup opportunities. This is a super complicated question, and we're only getting started with it. So who knows? It all ends up in a big soup, and the soup starts at A and ends up at D.
Last question, really fast. How many years do you think it'll take for us to reach a fully circular economy as the norm? Wow. Jonas?
I think we've started. I think it's going to take maybe 10, 20 years, maybe.
Okay, Michelle?
Same.
2040.
Holger? 24?
2040.
2040. Year 2040.
Yes.
Okay, year 2040. Marco?
I would say the same, 10 to 20 years.
10 to 20 years. All to say, let's not be discouraged. This is a long game. We're investing in the long haul. This is a marathon, This is not a sprint. So a round of applause for our panelists. This is a circular economy practice. Thank you, everyone, so much.